He walked up to his house, clutching his cap in his hand. Soft light streamed from the windows of the living room and bedroom, small lights in the darkness that surrounded his house. As he approached, he saw through the living room window a dining table lit by candles. The table was set for two: fine china, crystal glasses, and silverware. The wine was chilled in an ice bucket, and luxuriously arranged flowers completed the setting. Soft jazz was playing inside, and the house looked cozy and warm, a sharp contrast to the cold darkness that accompanied it on the long walk from the main road. There was a flicker of warmth coming from the fireplace, an unnecessary addition to the heating system, but a focal point for the slow-loving foreplay they often enjoyed after a perfect evening. They savored food and drinks for a long time, talked, discussed, made plans, prolonged the pleasure, knowing that everything would end in the ecstatic culmination of another wonderful evening in their 8-year marriage. It would have been a perfect homecoming if only he wasn't expected there. Previously, Captain Brian Burrows stunk. The smell was so disgusting that he swore he could smell it even on his tongue, and the sensation constantly irritated him. The hastily taken uniform clearly did not fit him. The trousers were too short, the jacket without insignia was too big, and in the cap he looked like Forrest Gump. His boots, despite repeated attempts to clean them, remained dirty and scratched from the chase through the mountains. The thought that he looked sloppy bothered him. It didn't fit with his self-image. He didn't even have time to shave before he was sent aboard a C-30 from Kuwait to Ramstein, Germany, with the promise that his equipment and personal belongings would follow. 4 days of running from the vengeful Taliban through the mountains of Afghanistan, trying to avoid capture, with sleep only minutes, sometimes even seconds, was his only concern, and so it had to be. But now that the pressure has subsided, his personal hygiene and appearance have begun to come to the fore. The mission was both successful and feubar in military slang. It meant total fucked up. There are 3 of them, dressed in the traditional village clothes of the locals, tanned to the point that they could be mistaken for locals. Selected in part for their ability to speak the local dialect, they successfully followed clues and leads from intelligence until they finally tracked down their target, one man in a cave system at the end of an almost indistinguishable trail. However, intelligence did not take into account that this place was also a haven for an entire company of foreign fighters. The captain sighed, but the mission had to be accomplished, and Phillips and Ramirez knew it. Typically, a captain commands a company of up to 200 men. Now he only had 2. But this is the specificity of special forces. You do what you know best, and not what is prescribed by the regulations. This time his task was to find a way to penetrate, develop a plan, execute it, and the sergeant and corporal were waiting for the order. He made decisions. Corporal Craig Phillips and Sergeant Manny Ramirez were his weapons. As a sniper team working for a government agency of an unspecified name, they worked together for 7 years, and this experience allowed them to achieve a level of mutual understanding that seemed almost telepathic. Phillips was the gunner and Ramirez operated a Macmillan TAC 338 rifle, favoring .338 Lapua Magnum cartridges for long-range shots. They were among the best in the American Army. Usually they worked together in the field, and Ramirez was in charge. But this goal was considered important enough that Captain Burrows was given command. As someone who had been involved in numerous infiltration operations in the region, his job was to lead them to the location, confirm the target, and organize the takedown. He gave them the opportunity to decide for themselves how to organize the shot, since this was not within his competence. Instead, he was to guard them and help guide them while they watched and waited for the right moment. His reputation was such that Ramirez and Phillips were more than happy for him to take over. He had a habit of returning with his men intact. Finally, they reached the valley, approaching from the ridge of the western slope to avoid any observation posts located at the ends of the path. There was one observation post with 2 guards, neither of whom were paying enough attention to their task. Burrows waited until one of them went to relieve himself and silently killed him, delivering a bloodless blow. The remaining guards suffered the same fate, and the trio carefully hid their bodies before moving on. The likelihood of their absence being noticed any time soon seemed small, since the observation of their actions and the amount of supplies on hand indicated that they were there on permanent duty. Their absence could well be attributed to desertion. Take half the supplies so it looks like they took enough to last the long journey, Burrows ordered. They completed this task, after which they examined the top to get a clear view of the target. The thinly planted trees did not provide a direct view of the area below, and they had to carefully descend the steep side of the valley. From a position almost a kilometer from the suspected Taliban cave system, they carefully examined the area. Hidden among the rocks, scattered boulders, and sparse bushes, they focused their attention on the target, a small dark area under a rock outcropping on the opposite slope. In the end, this was easily identified as the entrance to the cave, as various men in clothing ranging from traditional to Western attire periodically stepped outside to smoke, empty the waste bucket, or get some fresh air. Between them, Ramirez and Phillips identified at least 24 people wearing European clothes, with watches, lighters, and sunglasses, which meant that they were foreign fighters. If these were tribal people hiding from war, they might have had rare imported items as status symbols, but their numbers indicated otherwise. Burrows attached a small handheld device to his satellite phone and began quickly typing the message, "On location." Then, moving slowly, he lay down next to the other two. He got them into position, and now it was up to the other two to complete the mission. After that, he had to lead them back. So he put his head in his hands and slept for an hour. Sleep has always been valuable to any soldier, whether in an active combat zone or anywhere else. Phillips, lying on his stomach, scanned the area through a powerful M151 monocular, whose mill rangefinder matched the sights on the TAC 338 rifle. From time to time, he consulted a photograph of the target. He taped an identification photo to his wrist so he could compare the potential smoker to their target without moving. Movement was more likely to be a telltale factor than direct detection. Their ghillie suits were tailored to the environment, with dirt, plants, and branches blurring their silhouettes. But any movement could become deadly. There was almost no conversation between the two members of the sniper team. At the base, they were loud, outgoing, and almost tactile in their interactions as they rested between missions. But here, as they carried out their task, they worked in almost complete silence, broken only by the wind that occasionally kicked up dust on the path winding through the valley below. Phillips turned his full attention to the men around the cave entrance, waiting for a signal from the captain that one of the other groups had found their target, or that this very target will appear in his sights. There were no insignia or symbols among the foreign fighters, and the chief tactician and planner in the area, Abdul Nur al-Nazir, had no distinctive features. He could only be identified by his face, although they had one ace up their sleeve. Al-Nasir was a smart but humble man who used to sell and repair cell phones in a Baltimore mall, also selling cases and screen protectors in bright plastic colors. Hearing the call to arms, he returned to his homeland and soon became one of the chief operational planners for the Taliban's combat and punitive forces. He became famous in the Pentagon and among Taliban commanders after a raid on one of the American bases, during which a 3-star general accidentally ended up at the base. Rapid preparation and use of embedded assets were al-Nazir's trademarks. A mortar attack from one side momentarily distracted everyone at the base, allowing an Afghan soldier to launch an attack from within. Neither the general nor the soldier survived. The lieutenant general's death was something that the U.S. Army could not let go unpunished, and several special forces teams were sent to Afghanistan, ready to retaliate. However, Afghanistan was a country consisting almost entirely of high, barren mountains intersected by rocky valleys. The valleys allowed for a basic road and communications network, while the mountains concealed cave systems that could shelter entire regiments from aerial surveillance. It was then that a local tribal man, attracted by rumors of a high reward for information on al-Nazir, decided to seize the opportunity. In the course of his questioning, he found out that Americans were willing to pay so much that his family could live in abundance, without knowing need, for many generations. He would become richer than anyone in his tribe, especially if he decided to receive a reward in gold. And then he could take advantage of the second part of the reward, free access for him and his family anywhere in the world, with the exception of the United States. Fearful but determined, he made contact with the nearest American base, trying not to be seen a shadow in the night, and reported all the information to the intelligence officer located outside the base. The officer insisted that the informant show them the place and not just tell them about it, but at this point his courage deserted him. Even if the Americans were disguised as tribal people, leading them through the mountains to the Taliban base was a death sentence waiting to happen for his entire family. No, he decided to simply talk about a large cave system that might be of interest. The officer wrote down all the details, questioning him meticulously for agonizingly long minutes. He then warned that if he did not lead them to the site personally, he would only be able to receive the reward if the Americans destroyed the Taliban and publicly confirmed the operation. Cursing the infidels, the tribal man and his dreams of wealth disappeared into the night. The only detail that upset intelligence officers at the base and at the Pentagon was the description of the cave entrance, which was located under a massive rock outcrop, protruding like the finger of Allah. This explained why satellite imagery and drone flights had not recorded the location of the base. This also meant that ground forces would have to be brought in. Drones would not be able to accomplish this task. It was impossible to launch a rocket into a hole that was not visible. Even if they destroyed the cliffside, there would be no other way out, and the Taliban could claim a propaganda victory by dumping the prisoners' bodies in the caves and telling the world's press that American gangsters have attacked and killed innocent peasant families again. 4 teams were dispatched to various areas, matching the informant's description. Captain Barrows's trio was Team 3, and they found a rock outcropping with a cave underneath. After a brief reconnaissance and identification of blind spots in the target area, the sniper team prepared control points for quick targeting. For 2 days, they barely moved, Barrows replacing Phillips every hour when his eyes began to get tired, red from the salty sweat running down his face. At night, they relied on detachable night sights to do the job. On the second day, shortly before dawn, as Phillips was ready to hand over duty, he suddenly tensed, hissed quietly, and pressed a button on the side of the monocular. "It's him, Captain," he whispered, without taking his eyes off the sight. "I caught it on camera. You can confirm." Barrows looked at the small screen, which he hastily pulled towards him. He didn't even know what this device was called. Intelligence did not consider it necessary to tell him when they hurriedly showed him how to use it. On the screen, fixed in motion and turned slightly to the left towards the 3 militants, was Al-Nazir. Barrows connected the device to the satellite phone and quickly entered the code. "Take aim," Phillips commanded quietly as Ramirez crawled a few centimeters forward and set the rifle on the bipod, the butt resting comfortably against his shoulder. The corporal crawled closer to position himself next to the sniper's boots and, crouching, set up the monocular, pointing it over the shooter's shoulder just above the rifle's sight line. His task was to catch the bullet's trail, the air cut by the bullet in flight. If he missed, he would determine where the bullet hit and tell Ramirez how to adjust his sights for the next shot. From the very beginning, Phillips felt uneasy about this operation and was determined to complete it as quickly and efficiently as possible. According to observation, Point 3 Alpha, the gunner continued, saying the words almost like a mantra, a song he and Ramirez sang before each shot. The sniper adjusted his sight. 3 Alpha meant a landmark in the area of the entrance to the cave. 4 people for 3 hours. "I see," Ramirez whispered, slightly adjusting the rifle a few millimeters. "1 person moves for 7 hours. There was a short pause, then Phillips continued. "On target." Ramirez put his eye to the scope. "Contact," muttered the sergeant, without blinking and continuing to follow the man in the crosshairs. "The target is wearing a black robe and a white turban. He's carrying something in his left hand." Phillips nodded. This matched the description of the goal. "Contact has been confirmed. Check parallax and miles." Ramirez tilted the rifle slightly. They waited, trying to suppress their impatience to complete the operation. They were deep in enemy territory, surrounded by an unknown number of fighters and a hostile local population. Now they had to wait for confirmation from some nameless officer located in secure, air-conditioned offices far away from here. But all three understood that a mistake could not be made. This is why snipers are so valued in the Army. On the wall of the Marine Corps Sniper School at Camp Pendleton, there was a sign with a Chinese proverb, "Kill one, scare 1,000." This spoke for itself. "We're waiting," Burrows said calmly. "We are waiting." "Damn," Ramirez cursed quietly as his target crouched down to talk to some of his men. Slowly and smoothly, he raised the butt of the rifle a few millimeters to compensate for the change in target position. "Committed," Ramirez repeated. Several agonizingly long minutes passed, and the officer's screen changed to display the word "confirmed." "Fire when ready," Burrows said quietly. "Sight correction," Phillips immediately reported. Ramirez began his pre-shooting routine, inhale deeply, then exhale slowly. Phillips, who was nearby, also held his breath, as if instinctively. "Ready," whispered the sniper. Deviation to the left, 400ths. The distance had been recorded in the rifle sight since the previous day. Ramirez made some final minor adjustments to the light breeze that Phillips had measured at the last moment. Even the weakest gust could affect the trajectory of a bullet at a distance of more than a kilometer. They did not wait for the reaction of the militants. Their mission did not involve a firefight. Ignoring the firefight that began 10 seconds later, they could imagine how the rest of the militants ran out of the cave like ants from a disturbed nest. No one fired in their direction, and when Burrows looked back, he saw that the militants were shooting at random in different directions. After a few seconds, the three gathered their backpacks and weapons and, taking turns moving from cover to cover, began to slowly and zigzag their way back to the top of the hill. They almost managed to reach the top when the real shooting began. They were spotted, and at that moment the operation went awry fewbar. Phillips was shot first. "Damn, I don't believe it," he wheezed in pain, writhing on the ground, trying to get it under control. "Damn luck." Ricochet hit the ankle. These idiots couldn't get into the barn, even if they stood close to each other. Usually they shoot in the air and ask Allah to direct the bullet, but here they were lucky. Burrows grabbed him by the arm, noticing that his face had become pale and covered with sweat from shock. Looking like pentathlon competitors, they moved further up the slope, constantly scanning the terrain ahead. "It's sad to say, but maybe God hates you, Cabron," Ramirez said as they lifted Phillips up a steeper section of the slope. "You must be an evil bastard." "He has his reasons," Phillips croaked. "Damn you, brother," Phillips responded, using the word hermano, which was slang for big brother. They really were that close. "Let's rest at the top," Burrows said, ignoring the insults the two old friends were throwing at each other, words that could have led to a fight if uttered by anyone else from the Corps. He didn't need to tell the wounded man not to take off his boot. Although the boot pulled my foot into painful corners, it helped. Once they reached the shelter, they would remove the boot, bandage the wound, and somehow fix the joint, although Phillips would no longer be able to walk on it, perhaps never. However, they didn't have a chance. As soon as they reached the top, they were greeted by a barrage of fire. All three instantly fell to the ground. Behind dubious cover, a small protrusion on the ground, they pulled Phillips aside, where a few stunted trees miraculously survived the hostile soil of the heights, offering imaginary protection. Ramirez briefly considered using the sniper rifle, but the range was too short for it to be effective, and if attacked, its bolt action would not allow for multiple shots quickly. Both men crawled forward, trying to scout out the enemy without being noticed. Periscopes would have been useful in such a situation, but they were considered an unnecessary burden, extra weight that slowed down the soldiers' movement. Damn, one of these could come in handy now, Burrows thought. The thought was interrupted by a sharp sound nearby, audible even among the shooting, which seemed to come from everywhere. Ramirez relaxed and crawled back a little, facing the ground. He looked over at Phillips, hoping he was still unconscious. The friendship the two forged in the Marine Corps was stronger than most, and Burrows knew it. Phillips looked at him, lying on his back with a pistol in his hand. "Get out," he groaned. Burrows shook his head. "Get out, or they'll kill us all," Phillips wheezed, as if shouting in a whisper. The captain understood everything. Both knew the reality of the situation. Phillips could not move without help, and Ramirez's death deprived him of this opportunity. If they are not killed on the spot, they will be captured, kept barely alive, and then publicly executed. Barros had the same thought in case of a similar outcome, and she still remained. Barros helped Phillips roll onto his stomach, facing his enemy, and placed the Sig Sauer in his hands. A Colt 1911 pistol was laid next to him, ready. No, Phillips was not going to give up alive. The captain squeezed the wounded man's shoulder, squeezed lightly, knowing that at that moment any words had no meaning, and then, without looking back, he crawled to the left. There was a short burst behind him. Phillips attracted all the attention of the opponents to himself. Barros reached the outcropping of rocks, walked around it, and began to move downwards, away from the firefight, the sound of the gunfire seeming increasingly furious and loud, as if the gunmen were trying to drown out the insolence of the American soldier. Then there was a short pause and again a flurry of shots. Amid the noise, Barros clearly heard a shot from the Colt and quietly whispered goodbye to Phillips. He really did not face a public execution. Barros did not have time to cover his tracks from the ambush site, and the fighters, especially the local ones, would quickly find out that there were 3 in the group that killed Al-Nazir. The hunt has begun. Waking up abruptly as the massive plane landed at Ramstein, Barros still felt dazed and a little dazed. Thoughts and memories were confused as he hastily boarded a plane that would take him to Virginia. He was determined to make up for lost sleep, so he lay down on the mattress and fell asleep instantly, not even feeling the strong vibrations of the plane as it gained power for takeoff. His last thoughts were about how lucky he was to find a place where the little bird helicopter could find him and pick him up, guided to within a meter by that same smart little device. Waiting to evacuate with his finger on the cancel button, ready to press it if he was discovered, seemed to be the longest moment of the entire mission. As they took to the night sky and flew to safety, Barros thanked the pilot sincerely, knowing that piloting a tiny MH-6J helicopter at night, deep in enemy territory, required exceptional, almost suicidal courage. Barros slept the entire way to America and remembered almost nothing about subsequent interrogations. He didn't even remember boarding the bus that took him deep into the heart of the country or the other passengers who thanked him for his service. But he perfectly remembered the long journey to his home, and no matter how hard he tried, he would never forget what he found there. Later, Brian Barros opened the door to his home, enjoying the familiar smell mixed with the aroma of the famous beef stroganoff his wife was preparing. He never forgot the smell, and it again brought pleasure to his senses, despite how fast his heart beat and how heavy his soul became. Hoping that the situation was an official visit to inform his wife about his business trip, he looked around carefully. Without noticing it, he crumpled his cap in his hands and breathed heavily through his nose until suspicion began to turn into confidence. He again found himself in combat readiness mode, as if he were in enemy territory. The first thing he noticed were the perfectly polished boots sitting neatly under the coat rack near the front door. When it came to shoes, his wife Jenny was a meticulous person, and apparently she insisted that her guest take off his shoes upon entry. Barros immediately knew that it was a guest by the officer's jacket hanging over his boots. There were 2 gold stars on the shoulders and rows of ribbons, most of which meant nothing, adorned the chest. This means it was not an official visit. The Pentagon did not send generals to tell the captain's wife news of his service, if the need arose. This was done by the majors and chaplains. Barros thought that perhaps Jenny had first switched to lieutenants and then promoted to generals for her diligence in bed. He thought he would miss her efforts when he saw strange slippers standing next to the fireplace. Part of him screamed about storming upstairs to the bedroom and catching them both. They would both deserve what happened next. But did the betrayal deserve death? He shook his head. If he had walked into the bedroom and found them there, he would have killed them both, her quickly, him slowly. Or maybe it's the other way around. He heard her voice from above, a voice that was imprinted in his memory like diamonds, and now was cast in his heart like concrete. Blindly throwing his crumpled cap towards the stairs, he threw open the front door and ran outside. If he had stayed, he would have added 2 more deaths to those already plaguing his mind, waiting to rise to the surface again. Killing a person, even in war, leaves its mark. He had seen it in many of his core comrades. The murder was pushed deep into the subconscious, like a drowned man, and then, like a drowned man, it swelled, slowly rising to the surface. Then came a feeling of guilt, trembling, withdrawal from society, often a bottle, and sometimes a bullet. Men dealt with this in different ways, but these thoughts had to be suppressed at the moment of murder. The job required it, and as a rule, killing was part of it. Burroughs realized he had reached his limit. 2 more deaths right now would be too much. He walked along the road, not thinking about the direction, blindly but confidently, black thoughts reflected in the dark night around him. He was only gone for 2 weeks. 2 fucking weeks. How much sex did you need if you couldn't last 2 weeks without it? He raged silently, his face remaining motionless. And not only did I let that bastard into my body, but into my bed, into my seat at the table, into my damn chair, every place in my life, except those dirty operations where fucking generals never go. He realized that he was a replacement in every sense. She called for reinforcements and sent them back to their original position, just another anonymous form in the crowd. In a sense, she robbed him of his very identity. Burroughs was a man who rarely doubted himself. Whenever possible, he made team decisions after careful thought and planning. When the situation required it, he could quickly make the right decisions and immediately voice them. He was the same at home, although now he had no home, and he was lost. He had nowhere to go and no way to get there. The headlights behind illuminated the road ahead, stretching his shadow far ahead, and he stopped, crouching slightly and standing on his tiptoes. He recognized the sound of his own car, such things are not forgotten. But whether it was Jenny or her lover driving, he didn't want to risk them trying to hit him. They took everything else that mattered to him. Why not take his life insurance? The car slowed down and stopped nearby. The passenger door swung open. It was his wife, now his ex-wife. He corrected himself in his thoughts. She leaned across the seat and waved at him. "Why did you leave?" Burroughs did not remember getting into the car. Then he found himself next to her, staring at her profile in the dim light of the headlights. Even her silhouette was beautiful, he admitted. He thought everything else was the same, but now he realized that she was ugly on the inside. What he took for a beautiful soul turned out to be a disgusting disguise, a pathetic parody. "I know everything," he hissed through clenched teeth. "All. I'm so sorry you found out about it this way. We plan to sit down together next week and discuss the new situation." Her voice was light and casual, as if she were talking about the neighbors coming over for a barbecue. "How nice for all of us to calmly discuss how to kick me out onto the street and drag this idiot into my place." His voice became louder. He tried to suppress the growing rage at her words. Well, honey, it's not like you to put it that way. And please don't shout, I'm close," she answered in the same calm tone. "Well, it's not every day that I discover that my wife is cheating on me," he muttered through gritted teeth, even more infuriated by her reasonable tone. Although now, looking back, I could make such discoveries every day if I weren't so blind. And don't you dare call me darling. I'm not your darling anymore. You know, judging by your reaction, it seems that you don't understand I did this for both of us. You and I, together as always." She sang the last words, as she did sometimes, as if she did not realize the devastation she had brought. Burroughs felt his jaw drop. He fought in 4 hot spots and represented the Marine Corps in 9 more countries. He'd seen a lot of things, the good, the bad, and the just plain weird, but this was the first time he'd been so shocked and dumbstruck multiple times in one night. "What?" he exhaled. "What?" Her voice filled with joy and enthusiasm. "Everything will be so wonderful. He will be by my side while you are away, and your career will skyrocket right to the top. Isn't this wonderful?" He looked at her silently as she turned back into her driveway, his mouth wide open in amazement again. Jenny was as cheerful as the last time he returned from his mission, and just like that time before, she was happy, truly happy. But she thought, "What are you even talking about?" he asked as she turned off the engine, pressed the garage door remote, and turned to him. "He will use his connections to promote you quickly," she replied, smiling. "He is a very important person. He is responsible for all procurement for the army, so everything will work out great for all of us." Are you kidding me? First, no one person is responsible for all procurement for the army. If you're talking about the supply chief, then your damn lover is a 2-star general. And the supply manager is a 1-star general, and besides, this is a woman. But more importantly, what made you think I would accept this? This idiotic, disgusting offer? How could you even think for a second that I would agree to this? To sharing you. This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. And believe me, I've heard a lot of mind-bogglingly stupid proposals at the base. She waved his words aside with a wave of her hand. Perhaps I misunderstood his position. I know for sure that it's all secret. He grabbed her hand and turned her to face him. The light from the garage illuminated her full lips and wide blue eyes. "Jenny, did he give you something? Are you on some kind of pill? You don't seem as smart as usual. When did you meet him?" "No, of course not. He would never do this." "I'm fine," she replied with an overly wide smile that belied her words, although he decided not to insist. "How do you know? You couldn't have known him for long. I was only gone for 2 weeks. Or were you already having fun while I was here? It seems to me that he is some kind of swindler. Is he threatening you or blackmailing you in some way?" She smacked his leg with a friendly smile and laughed as she climbed out of the car, forcing him to get out to continue the conversation. "No, stupid. He's the sweetest person. Why don't you come and meet him? I'm sure you will soon become best friends. Comrades in arms." "Oh, if I get my hands on him, believe me, I'll rip him off," Barrows said, staring at her with something akin to hatred through the roof of the car. "Oh my God, that sounded like a direct threat to a senior officer," Barrows said. Jenny's gaze moved behind him, and she suddenly smiled. "Little bear, this is Brian, my husband." Barrows turned around sharply, feeling even more bitter that she had betrayed him by calling her lover Little Bear. Jenny always said that this was her personal nickname only for him, but now she gave it to someone else. The man standing at the front door was dimly lit, his face hidden in shadow. He was tall, not very strong, and he had. "It's my damn robe, you bastard. You have no right to wear it. Take it off so I can burn it, or I swear that." He fell silent as he felt something hard and round pressed against his back. Jenny looked worried. "Excuse me, Captain," came a male voice that sounded somewhat familiar. Barrows glanced over his shoulder and saw a uniformed soldier with a machine gun. The man took a cautious step back, not giving the captain the opportunity to take any drastic action. "Styles," Barrows said, "thank God you're here. It seems to me that my wife was drugged with something, and—" He fell silent as the machine swung slightly, although it did not move away from his body for a second. The Marine kept his distance, ruling out any attempt to disarm him before firing. "I think you need to keep quiet, sir." Another man appeared next to Corporal Leo Styles. Barrows immediately recognized Staff Sergeant Daniel Landry, although he looked oddly tanned. Both were from his company, or perhaps from his company when he joins them again. Barrows worked with them, fought alongside them, ate and played basketball. They were his real brothers, the same comrades his wife had spoken about earlier. And that's why it hurt so much to see them both pointing guns at him, ready to pull the trigger. "What's happening?" he asked, trying to control his voice and hide the rage that only grew from the feeling of betrayal, now from his own people. The figure in the shadows spoke again, with an accent that was difficult to recognize. "Captain, you are a smart man, and I will not intimidate you. But you should understand that there is a high probability that you will face a tribunal for carrying out an unauthorized operation in which 2 of your people died. This could mean a very long time in Leavenworth. Hope you enjoy Kansas." These people are here to arrest you." Borrow's head was spinning. What is he talking about? The operation was not just authorized, it was a direct order. He did not choose to carry out this mission. "Nonsense," he replied quietly. "I did not act arbitrarily. Sanchez and Phillips died in an ambush during a routine operation, and that has nothing to do with it. We both know that the fact is that you are having sex with my wife, my future ex-wife, and soon you yourself will become a former general, sleeping with subordinates' wives. You began courting this prostitute long before the mission ended, if it ever began. If I don't punish you, the judge will advocate. The memory of Maher and Hale will ensure that." The man retreated momentarily at the mention of John Maher, a general caught having affairs with the wives of two of his subordinates. Hale was found guilty of affairs with the wives of at least 4 officers. Both were demoted and allowed to retire with reduced pensions. Jenny gasped as if she had been punched in the stomach, although she was more worried about the words ex-wife and prostitute. "No, honey, it's not." She was interrupted by her lover. "I told you not to talk to your husband without my permission," the man said calmly, regaining his composure. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Everything started spinning in Barron's head again. How could this happen, and most importantly, how so quickly? None of this made sense. What power did that bastard have over Jenny, and more importantly, how to destroy it? Even if he thought it was over, he couldn't let this freak get away with it. His rage increased even more. "The pathetic lamentations of a cuckold mean nothing," his wife's lover said calmly. "I have already spoken with the respected Advocate General. He was here a couple of days ago for a party and enjoyed the company of your wife. It is he who is preparing the case against you." "No, no, you're lying." He turned to the frightened woman. "He's lying, isn't he?" Her eyes widened in the darkness. "It shouldn't have happened like this. It was just a party. I didn't want to." "Party? How many men?" He hissed, his anger now on the verge of exploding. He needed to restrain himself. "If it fails, it will all end in bloodshed." She shook her head. "How many?" he shouted. She shuddered with fear. Silence thickened, enveloping the 5 participants in the scene. "6 or 7, she finally whispered. "But I did it for you. Everything is for you." Burroughs clenched his fists, trying to force the image out of his head, a line of men in uniform standing outside his bedroom, laughing and joking as they waited their turn. Their uniforms were different colors, but they all had stars on their shoulders. He fell to all fours, his head hanging, the picture of a completely broken man. Behind him, Stiles took a step forward. There was a fight. Jenny cried just as she had at her father's funeral, her mascara running down her cheeks, almost reaching the traces of red lipstick she had smudged, losing her face. Usually Burroughs was ready to do anything to make her stop crying, but now it seemed to him that in front of him was a clown or a drunken woman of easy virtue. All he could feel was sadness. "I would have to use this against you," he said, his voice much calmer than his feelings. She screamed in fear again. "But that would be a waste of half an ounce of lead and steel. You're not even worth that, no matter what your clients pay for you." He heard movement from the house and ducked behind the car, never taking his eyes off hers. "I hope you get rich, Jenny," he said, and heard his voice tremble with heartache. "I don't. Please. I don't, please." "I don't care anymore," he replied. "I don't care so much that I don't even want to find out all the details. I don't know how or why you became the way you did, and I can't find even an ounce of desire in myself to figure it out. I'm too disgustingly angry and too depressed. I can't look at you." The sound of a siren was heard in the distance. Of course, General Shitmine had backup somewhere nearby. Of course there was. He hid while his soldiers died. Like all generals, let them all go to hell. Let everyone die. Burroughs stopped only momentarily to take several magazines and a pistol from the 2 men. Then, with one last glance at Jenny, he shook his head in disgust and disappeared into the darkness. There must be a solution somewhere. Somewhere. "I'm sorry, but I can't allow this." "I didn't ask for permission. I'm just being polite about letting you know what's going to happen. If that happens, you'll destroy our best chance." The short man spat contemptuously on the floor. "HRA, nonsense." Dr. Janos Elik held back a sigh without revealing his disgust. He had already dealt with such people. This is how he thought of Muslims. Those people, or simply they, and looked down on them. They were not his friends, and in another time and place they would probably have tried to kill each other. But as the old saying goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. He needed their money and support. So far he had it, but this support was unreliable and could be withdrawn if this visit did not go well. His guest was not the first to make demands, and most likely not the last. But they were so close, so close. He didn't show his contempt and kept all his negative feelings in check. "Maybe if I show you," he suggested. They both spoke English, the only language they had in common, although at different levels of proficiency. "Maybe you'll see a little more of the huge potential of this project." "Potential is not action," said the guest. "The potential is maybe, action is a yes. But different actions lead to different results, and perhaps this is the action that will finally help us achieve our goal." The short man stared at him, his eyes narrowed in intense thought. He was curious about what some people were telling him in whispers. However, he did not believe in it. "Show me." Janos Illich led the man to the door, leading out of the comfortably furnished reception area, and they moved along a long corridor. On the left were unsigned, anonymous doors, and on the right were windows that offered stunning views of the Lorelei River and the city, which was nestled on the opposite bank. "Are you Czech?" asked the dark-skinned man. The doctor shook his head. "No, I'm Serbian." "And I am Samingan," the other answered briefly. Janos nodded with a smile, although he had never been to that place and knew very little about it. He guessed, and was right, that it was a place with sand mountains, but he didn't care where his guest was from. If the whole world were lucky enough, this area could disappear from the face of the earth in an earthquake, taking all its inhabitants with it. That would be great. It is better, of course, for this to happen later rather than earlier, at least not before the project is completed. At the end of the corridor, there was a door leading to a small room, from which there were two more doors on either side. Janos led the guest into an even smaller room, from where through the window one could see a room with one bed. There were several devices around the bed, their lights flickering silently. Ivs were placed on either side of the patient, slowly pouring fluid into his arms. The guest thought they were in a soundproof booth and opened his mouth to speak. The doctor gave him a sharp look and with an urgent gesture indicated that he should remain silent. The short man frowned, but complied. Janos quickly pressed the switch on the narrow table in front of the window. "Microphone," he explained. The guest immediately began to reprimand him. "Are you spending our money on treatment when we could show the execution and prove to the world how weak the Americans are without their drones and missiles? This shit needs to end now." In response, the doctor pressed another button, and a female voice with an East Coast American accent was heard through a small speaker mounted on the wall next to the window. "When he said you would be arrested and sent to prison for the rest of your life." The figure in the bed, a thin man with a shaved head, nodded. "Do you remember how angry you were at the general who said that?" The figure nodded again. "Remember how even your own people turned their backs on you?" Nod. "And how did you vow to take revenge on him?" "Yes," whispered a voice, like the creaking of the rusty door hinges of a sarcophagus. "Remember how he said he took your wife, used her, and then gave her to other men at the party?" The man swallowed. Finally, he nodded again. "Remember how full of rage and despair you were when you found out how many times she cheated on you with those generals?" This time, a barely audible groan of despair accompanied the nod. "Remember how sad you felt that senior officers could just come and take your wife, take your house, take your place, steal your life?" Nod. Nod. "How frustrated were you because you couldn't stop it?" Nod. 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 "How powerless did you feel?" Janos pressed the keyboard in front of him and waited until his cousin, a talented voice actress with a gift for accents, moved on to the correct part of the script. His sister was in the other room, and she willingly accepted the job when he offered it to her, even though they had to move to the very end of the world to complete the order. "How angry are you now?" A roar of rage, pain, and despair shook the figure on the bed, his face contorted into a grimace that seemed barely human. "Remember when you ran into the dark, when you got to town and stole a car?" This time, the nod seemed to be a sign of relief that they had moved on to another part of his memories, away from his wife's betrayal. "Remember how lucky you were that you had money with you and were able to check into a hotel under someone else's name." The nod was formal. It was the most insignificant part of his escape from the nightmare. "Remember how you hid for days until you started planning your revenge?" Nod. "A desire to take revenge on those who betrayed and wounded you." Nod. "To everyone who rejected you, conspired against you, falsely accused you of their dirty plots." Nod. Janos pressed another button, and the voice paused for a moment before continuing. "Sleep now, Captain Burrows." The figure, which had previously been twitching and twisting like a doll on strings, gradually calmed down and froze. Janos checked the microphone switch before speaking. "Follow me." They left the observation room, and the Serb carefully closed the door behind him. The guest looked at the doctor. "Brainwashing." "No," said Janos. "It doesn't work. Americans, Russians, Chinese, Vietnamese, North Koreans, they all tried, and they all failed. It is impossible to force a person to do something that is contrary to his will. Brainwashing is like trying to make a sponge dance by hitting it with a shovel. If she moves, it will be purely reflexive." "Then hypnosis." The doctor shook his head. "Same problem. It's impossible to force people to do something they wouldn't want to do themselves." "What then?" "False memories." The guest looked at him doubtfully. "Sheikh Mohammed, please sit down. This may take some time." They sat down on pillows placed next to the window, which overlooked the mountains. Janos suggested that this peaceful landscape might have subconsciously reminded the sheikh of his homeland and helped calm his thoughts. "You have, of course, seen traumatic events," Janos began. The sheikh's memory flashed back to his cousin's wedding. A drone strike, and his beautiful cousin was killed. It was one of many losses. "Yes, he saw the injury." He nodded. "And you probably heard the stories of those who witnessed these events and noticed that everyone saw something different." Sheikh Mohammed frowned at the fair-skinned foreigner. What could this man know about the pain and sacrifices of the righteous? Is he trying to say that his family members who survived the explosion that killed the beautiful Kamisha are lying? The Serb noticed how his interlocutor frowned even more. "I suffered too," he said softly, "when we lived in the south of Serbia in a small town called Giardelica. Once a month, my family and I traveled by train to Vladichin Khan to visit my uncle Andrei and his family. My mother and sisters went shopping while my father and I talked and played with my cousins. And then we all had lunch together in the garden, the whole family. Do you know anything about Serbia?" The sheikh shook his head. "This is a very beautiful country, not rich, but beautiful. When we left our small town by train, we crossed the river on an old iron bridge. I always loved to lean out of the window and look down at the water. It was the South Morava. It always seemed like flying to me, although the river was not very wide and not very deep. I remember it was the day before my birthday, and I was delighted because Uncle Andrew had hinted that he would buy me an air rifle as a gift if my mother said I had behaved well. Even if the rifle were packed, I would have guessed it right away by its shape. My birthday is the 13th of April. When we crossed the bridge, I leaned out of the window as far as my mother would allow me, looked at the water, and suddenly I saw two footprints heading straight towards the bridge." Janos winced. "The next moment I was actually flying over the river. The explosions threw me off the bridge. They were bombs dropped from an airplane. I lost my entire family that day. My parents, grandparents, my sisters. The train did not have time to gain much speed before the impact, and when I fell into the river, I was almost unharmed. My uncle took me in even though the war affected everyone, and he did not have the means to feed even his own family. NATO later admitted that they bombed the bridge, but claimed that they did not intend to destroy the train. NATO, and that means America. They lead this gang of gangsters. I swore that one day I would avenge my people and my family. But that's beside the point. Everyone has their own pain. The sheikh nodded thoughtfully. The point is this, Janos continued after a short pause. Everyone who witnessed that event told it differently. Someone said that there was one plane, someone said that there was a whole squadron. Some said they saw an American star on the wing, others a British round mark on the tail, and someone claimed to have seen a burning plane falling into flames. One even said that he saw a tank shooting at the bridge. Everyone saw it differently. The brain always needs time to cope with adrenaline, and each person interprets what happens differently. For example, the police have long been accustomed to the fact that eyewitnesses who experience traumatic events always give different statements. Sheikh Mohammed nodded slowly. The same thing happened after the terrible ending at the wedding. But 2 years later, they all remembered the events the same way. They discussed them among themselves, read the reports, and their memories merged together. I took several lie detector tests, and they passed all of them. They all sincerely believed what they saw. He paused for effect. Even those who were not there at that moment. They remembered it as if they were right there at the scene. The Afghan warrior's eyes widened. He had to deal with the same thing. The men he stood next to watched on television as the martyrs flew their planes into the skyscrapers of New York. Some of them later swore that they had been in the city that day and watched the buildings fall from the safety of their hiding places. They remembered it as if they had actually been there, although this was impossible. False memories, he whispered. Janos nodded. He pointed to the examination room door. A group of specially trained men captured Captain Brian Burrows while he was sleeping 3 days after the murder of Abdul Noor al-Nazir. They did not stop pursuing him to create this opportunity, although they could have executed him on several other occasions. However, he remembers escaping in a helicopter. It's not something that someone told him. Nobody gave him the details. He just remembers this flight. If we woke him up now, he would swear that he escaped safely. But so many details. How do you know so much about him? We don't know, Janos answered evenly, and we don't need it. He receives a cocktail of drugs and is sedated not unconscious, but close to it. In this state, he hears the voice without asking unnecessary questions, and the script is written so as not to specify details. We simply ask him to remember how the helicopter picked him up, and he fills in the blanks from his own memories. He's a special forces guy, so we know he's probably flown helicopters before. These new memories are pieces of old ones. We didn't put them in his head, he did it himself. If we had asked if he remembered the pilot, he would have inserted a face from his past or remembered that he couldn't see him because of his helmet. We reminded him that he returned to America on a plane, but we do not know what exactly he remembered about that flight, what kind of plane it was, and who was flying with him. The soldiers who tried to arrest him were not described in our questions. He filled in the details himself, while his mind filled in the gaps in false memory. The general he remembered at home will be the one he does not know. We specifically asked him to remember that we could not see his face. He also remembers details about his wife that night, how she looked, how she spoke, what words she used. These memories are taken from different moments in their marriage. We just asked him if he remembered how she admitted to a long affair with the general and parties with high-ranking officers in their house. He filled in all the details and her words from his own memories, although perhaps the false memories were intensified by the fear that many soldiers have that their wives are cheating on them while they are in the service. His subconscious reinforced this fear, and she behaved this way, although consciously he believed that she would never do this. We don't know what was actually said. His rage is gradually increasing, Janos added with a smile, but it's not blind rage. The Afghan interrupted him. Did he tell you who told the Americans about al-Nazir's whereabouts? The doctor shrugged. We didn't ask. It wasn't necessary. Sheikh Mohammed looked at him intently. The Serb did not blush. We ourselves passed on the information to the Americans. One of our people carelessly spilled the beans to a well-known informant. He made quotation marks with his fingers on the word careless before the sheikh could express his anger. After that, we just had to wait. Al-Nazir has become a martyr to our cause, and we will miss him his insight and ability to plan. But in return, we received a weapon much more powerful than him. A weapon that I believe will become comparable to a nuclear warhead in its effect. The sheikh looked either doubtful or thoughtful. You want to use it against someone in America? He asked. We will not direct anyone, Janos began. It's HRA again. You could force him to go after the president. No, that's not how it works. Look, we don't know if he ever met the president, but I doubt it. We cannot create a false memory of a person with whom he has not crossed paths or interacted. From my research, I know that he fills in new memories with people he knows or creates images so vague that they become almost faceless. If he has never met the president, he cannot create a false memory based on his past memories, and a shapeless image of the president simply will not work. He has no personal animosity towards him, and we cannot create one unless we implant the president in some pre-existing memory. But imagining the president of the United States coming to his home to have sex with his wife would be too far-fetched for his mind to accept. He must trust his memory, otherwise it will fall apart. In short, we play on his doubts and fears to create his rage. False memories of his wife cheating on him, false accusations against him, and his comrades turning their backs on him all add fuel to the fire. This rage helps us form false memories, and this is what will give us our greatest victory. But if you can't give it a purpose, what good is it? I'd rather take him now and hand him over to the foreign fighters to execute him. He has a purpose. You said. I said we didn't give him a target. We didn't have to do this. He created his own goal. If you have too many wild goats eating everything around, you can bring in a wolf. But you don't teach a wolf to hunt or choose a goat for him. You just release it. He already knows what to do. We have a wolf, and he knows where the goats are, Janos finished. We just have to release it when it's ready in 3 weeks, when the false memories have taken hold. The goats are in Washington, Sheikh Mohammed said quietly. In the Pentagon, agreed Janos Ilik. In 3 weeks, we will transport the wolf to America and release it. And he is a real wolf. He knows how, who, and where to look for. Elsewhere, 7,000 miles away, a woman sobbed next to a Marine chaplain, knowing that her husband, the only man she had ever loved, the only one with whom she had shared her life, dreams, and bed, was most likely dead, lost in a foreign land, in the field where the wolves die. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.